Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes history doesn't announce itself with whispers. It roars through the corridors of power and leaves the world stunned. The recent $56 billion nuclear plant deal with India has done exactly that. It didn't just make headlines. It shook the foundations of the global energy order and left France, the very country long considered a nuclear powerhouse, in disbelief. This deal is not just about money. It's about trust, ambition, and a reordering of influence on the world stage. And if we examine this closely, we find three key takeaways that show why this moment will be remembered as a turning point in modern geopolitics. When you look at this $56 billion nuclear deal, the first thing that becomes obvious is that it is not simply about dollars and cents. It is not merely about the construction of reactors or the signing of contracts. At its core, this deal is India's declaration of energy sovereignty, the kind of bold statement that only a confident nation dares to make. For decades, India lived under the shadow of restrictions, limitations, and conditions. The world's so-called powers, particularly those who controlled nuclear technology, treated India as though it were a student always waiting for permission from its teacher. They spoke the language of cooperation, but in reality, they dictated terms. They insisted on oversight. They offered technology with strings attached, ensuring India would always remain dependent, always slightly behind. Think back to how many times India's nuclear ambitions were stifled by sanctions. How many times it was told you cannot enrich uranium beyond this level. You cannot purchase that piece of technology. You cannot trade this fuel unless you comply with conditions set by others. It was like asking a proud civilization to crawl when it was built to stand tall. And yet India endured. It developed what it could. It built expertise with limited resources. It weathered the storms of embargoes and suspicion. And all along, its people never abandoned the dream of true independence, not just political independence, but energy independence. Now look at the magnitude of this deal, $56 billion. That is not a small step, it is a giant leap. It is not just another entry in a balance sheet. It is a declaration written in bold letters. India will no longer be a beggar at the nuclear table. India will no longer wait for scraps of technology or favors from self-proclaimed guardians of atomic knowledge. India will set the agenda, choose the partners, and build the future. And this is what shocks France. For decades, France believed it held a privileged position in the nuclear hierarchy. It considered itself indispensable, as though no major project could move forward without its blessing or involvement. Yet here comes India with a deal so massive, so transformative, and France is not in the center of it. The surprise in Paris is not simply about business lost. It is about the realization that India is writing its own rules now. Energy sovereignty is not a slogan, it is a shield. It is the power to say, when global oil prices rise, our people will not suffer. When natural gas supplies are squeezed by geopolitical conflicts, our industries will not collapse. When others attempt to use energy as a weapon of influence, we will not bow down. Nuclear energy at this scale ensures that India's future is not held hostage to the whims of global markets or foreign capitals. It means that a nation of over 1 billion people, with aspirations as vast as its landmass, will have the steady flow of power needed to fuel its growth. But sovereignty also has a psychological dimension. Imagine the message this deal sends to every Indian citizen: your country is not waiting for permission anymore. It is not begging, it is building. It is not constrained by the doubts of yesterday, it is propelled by the vision of tomorrow. This is the kind of message that builds national pride, that inspires innovation, that encourages industries to grow around the certainty of stable energy. Factories can expand because they know the lights will stay on. Entrepreneurs can build because they know power will not be rationed. Farmers can benefit because energy-intensive irrigation will no longer be a distant dream. A sovereign energy policy does not only keep the turbines running, it keeps hope alive. And then consider the international stage. When India invests $56 billion in nuclear power, it is not only securing its domestic needs, it is altering global equations. Suddenly, nations that once saw India as a market for their technology are forced to view it as a competitor, as a producer, as an equal. France, especially, must confront this harsh truth. Its long-standing nuclear industry, once a symbol of dominance, is being overshadowed by India's rise. The shock in Paris is not just that India signed a deal. It is that India signed a deal without needing France, without being bound by France, without being lectured by France. This is how sovereignty looks in practice: the ability to make decisions free of coercion, the power to build partnerships on your own terms, and the courage to invest at a scale that no one can ignore. For India, sovereignty means not waiting for others to dictate what reactors can be built or what capacity can be installed. It means acting boldly, decisively, and unapologetically in pursuit of national interest. There is also a symbolic dimension here. $56 billion is not just a figure. It is a signal to the world that India is no longer a country of small projects and cautious steps. It is a country of mega visions and mega deals. It is a country willing to bet on its own strength, its own people, its own future. This is not the India of 1974, tested and isolated after its first nuclear steps. This is not the India of the 1990s, wrestling with sanctions and shortages. This is the India of the 21st century, powerful enough to shock France, confident enough to reshape the conversation, determined enough to never again accept dependency as destiny. Energy sovereignty does not mean India will isolate itself. On the contrary, it means India can choose freely whom to work with. Partnerships will be built not from desperation, but from strength. Deals will be signed not out of necessity, but out of opportunity. And that, above all, is what France cannot digest. Because once a nation becomes sovereign in energy, it becomes sovereign in every negotiation that follows. So let us be clear. This nuclear deal is more than a commercial agreement. It is a declaration that India will stand on its own feet, that it will no longer be restrained by the weight of others' conditions, that it will not compromise its future for the sake of outdated hierarchies. Sovereignty is not given, it is taken. And with this $56 billion deal, India has taken it. When we turn to the second reality hidden within this deal, we see something even more profound than the question of energy independence. It is the shift in global power equations. Because nuclear energy is not only about producing electricity, it is about producing influence. It is about control. For decades, the nations that mastered nuclear technology believed they had secured a permanent seat at the high table of global power. They wielded reactors as bargaining chips. They offered fuel supplies with hidden strings, and they used cooperation as a polite mask for control. Whoever controlled nuclear resources controlled leverage. It was that simple. France is the perfect example of this mindset. For years, its state-owned nuclear corporations were not just industrial enterprises, they were arms of foreign policy. Selling reactors to developing countries meant not only profits, but long-term dependence. Because when you buy a French reactor, you also buy French fuel, French servicing, French spare parts, and French conditions. France built not just nuclear plants, it built chains of reliance. And countries like India, hungry for energy but still climbing out of poverty, were forced to accept those terms, even when they carried subtle humiliation. But with one deal, India has shaken that system. A $56 billion pact is not business as usual. It is a statement that India is powerful enough to bypass old centers of influence and build new partnerships on its own terms. Think of the symbolism. Instead of being the one seeking approval, India has become the one choosing. Instead of being the follower, India is now the leader. For France, this is not just a lost opportunity, it is a collapse of a long-held belief that the developing world would always orbit around Paris when it came to nuclear technology. This is why the world is watching so closely. When a nation of India's size and stature refuses to play by old rules, the ripple effect spreads far beyond one deal. Washington notices, Beijing notices, Moscow notices, Tokyo notices. Because if India can challenge France's dominance in nuclear energy, what prevents it from challenging other entrenched hierarchies as well? What prevents it from rewriting the rules in technology, in defense, in trade, in space exploration? The shock of this deal is not limited to nuclear reactors. It is about the realization that the global balance of power is shifting eastward. And India is the one tilting the scales. And let us not underestimate what this means for alliances. Power in international politics is not only about military strength, it is about the ability to attract partners, to build networks of trust, to be seen as a reliable alternative to the old order. When India signs a nuclear deal of this magnitude, it signals to other nations, here is a country that can be counted on, here is a partner that is not trapped by Western dictates, here is a power that offers a genuine choice. For smaller countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, long frustrated by Western monopolies, India's bold move becomes a source of inspiration. It proves that dependency is not permanent, that sovereignty can be reclaimed, that influence can be redistributed. For France, the humiliation cuts deeper than economics. It is about prestige. Nuclear technology has long been a pillar of French pride, a symbol of its global importance. Losing a $56 billion opportunity to India's rising partnerships feels like losing a crown jewel. And prestige, once lost, is difficult to regain. The French shock is not only financial, it is existential. It forces them to confront the uncomfortable reality that their role as gatekeepers is ending, that the era when others needed their blessing is slipping away. But if France is shocked, India is strengthened, because influence is not measured only in contracts signed, it is measured in confidence gained. Every time India chooses freely, it grows stronger. Every time it bypasses old hierarchies, it gains credibility. And every time it demonstrates independence, it redefines what power looks like in the modern world. No longer is power about who can impose conditions, now it is about who can reject them. No longer is it about who can dominate, now it is about who can stand without domination. This is what terrifies the old powers, the realization that they cannot dictate to India anymore. They cannot use energy as leverage. They cannot expect India to wait in line for approvals. They cannot assume that India will always be a market rather than a maker. This nuclear deal is not an isolated transaction. It is part of a larger pattern. India is asserting itself in trade, in technology and defense, in space, and now in nuclear energy. It is taking leadership positions in forums like the G20, the BRES, and the Quad. It is speaking with a voice that others must listen to, whether they like it or not. And here lies the deeper point. When a country begins to set terms rather than accept them, it transforms the entire game. Imagine the world 10 years from now. Countries negotiating nuclear partnerships will not look first to France or the West. They will look to India. Investors deciding where to put their money and energy will not automatically trust Europe. They will trust India's record of delivering ambitious projects. Policymakers drafting energy strategies will not ignore India's experience. They will be compelled to study it. Influence will shift slowly but decisively because India has demonstrated it is no longer dependent. The $56 billion deal is a symbol of that power shift. France may see it as a shock, but in truth, it is the inevitable outcome of a world where Asia is rising, where old hierarchies are crumbling, and where a billion-strong democracy refuses to remain subordinate. Power has always been about perception. And the perception now is that India is unstoppable, France is vulnerable, and the balance of influence is being recalibrated before our eyes. So yes, France is shocked, but this shock is not an accident. It is the natural consequence of clinging to outdated assumptions while the world evolves. The new global power equation does not revolve around Paris. It does not revolve around Western capitals. It revolves around the choices of nations like India, bold enough to take their destiny into their own hands. And this, above all, is why the $56 billion nuclear deal will be remembered not as a transaction, but as a transformation. The third truth hidden inside this monumental deal is perhaps the most powerful of all. It is not merely about sovereignty, not only about shifting global power, it is about transformation. A transformation so vast that it will touch India's economy, its industries, its scientific community, and even its place in history. When a nation commits $56 billion to nuclear energy, it is not just buying power stations. It is building a new era. It is setting into motion a chain reaction, not of uranium, but of growth, jobs, skills, and global recognition. And this is the part that frightens France the most. Not simply that India has taken the deal away from them, but that India is using this deal to leap into an entirely new industrial age. Let us begin with the most obvious outcome: jobs and industries. A project worth $56 billion cannot be carried out by importing every bolt and every blade from abroad. It will require massive participation from Indian industries, from steel to construction, from robotics to electronics, from logistics to advanced engineering. It means that thousands of small and medium enterprises will suddenly find themselves linked to the biggest nuclear project in modern history. Every factory that manufactures a component will hire more workers. Every training center that prepares technicians will expand its programs. Every university that teaches nuclear science will attract more students, more funding, more attention. In short, the deal will not only generate electricity, it will generate opportunity. But opportunity is just the beginning. What makes this deal historic is the transfer of knowledge and technology it will inevitably trigger. Nuclear projects are not built in isolation, They demand ecosystems of innovation. Scientists, engineers, and policymakers must collaborate. Research labs must design new materials. Software companies must develop precision systems. Safety regulators must upgrade their standards. This kind of ecosystem does not vanish when the reactors are built. It becomes permanent infrastructure for national progress. The skills gained by working on such a colossal project spill over into other industries: aerospace, defense, space exploration, and renewable energy. India is not simply building nuclear plants. It is building capacity that will multiply across sectors for decades to come. This is what transformation looks like. When a nation builds competence on a scale it never had before, its entire economic foundation is reshaped. Think of Japan after World War II, when its focus on electronics and engineering turned it into a technological powerhouse. Think of South Korea, once struggling, now home to world-class giants in shipbuilding, semiconductors, and automobiles. India, with this nuclear project, is laying the foundation for its own industrial leap. And this leap terrifies competitors like France, because they understand what it means. They know that once India masters the scale of nuclear construction, it will not need outsiders the next time. It will be a provider, not a customer. It will be an exporter, not merely an importer. And that means the monopoly of old powers will be broken forever. Beyond industry, let us consider the impact on India's energy landscape. For decades, India has struggled with the dual challenge of growth and sustainability. On one side, 1 billion people demanding more electricity, more factories, more infrastructure. On the other, the global demand to reduce carbon emissions and protect the environment. Coal kept the lights on, but at a cost. Oil imports fed the economy, but at the mercy of foreign suppliers. Renewable energy expanded, but intermittency limited its reach. Nuclear power, however, offers a solution that balances both sides: clean, reliable, large-scale energy. A 56 billion expansion of nuclear capacity means millions of homes powered without pollution. It means cities with steady electricity, industries with predictable supply, and rural areas with access they never had before. This is not just an energy project, it is a project of justice. It bridges the gap between those who have and those who have not. It ensures that development reaches every corner of the nation. And now imagine the geopolitical impact of this transformation. An India that can power its economy cleanly, reliably, and independently becomes a magnet for investment. Foreign companies looking for stable environments will choose India over nations trapped in energy crisis. Regional partners seeking affordable power will look to India as a source of technology and expertise. Even global climate negotiations will tilt differently because India will not arrive at the table as a nation pleading for concessions, but as a nation demonstrating solutions. The prestige, the influence, the respect that comes with this transformation is immeasurable. It redefines India not as a country struggling to catch up, but as a leader offering pathways to others. France's shock, then, is multi-layered. They did not just lose a deal, they lost an era. For decades, they believed that industrial dominance was theirs to maintain. They believed that nations like India would forever remain dependent customers. But with this transformation, that illusion collapses. India is no longer waiting for permission, it is building capability. India is no longer trapped by conditions, it is charting independence. India is no longer a consumer only, it is a creator, an innovator, a builder of the future. The loss France feels is not only financial, it is symbolic. It is the sting of realizing that their prestige as an indispensable nuclear power is fading before their eyes. But for India, this is triumph, because this deal represents not only energy, not only jobs, not only innovation. It represents confidence. It shows the world that India believes in itself enough to commit at this scale. And when a nation believes in itself, nothing can stop it. Every turbine that spins, every reactor that hums, every home that lights up becomes proof that India is moving forward. It becomes a symbol of resilience, ambition, and vision. This is why this deal will be remembered. Not because it shocked France, though it did. Not because it is worth 56 billion, though that is massive. But because it marks the dawn of a new industrial and strategic era for India. It is the moment when India stopped being seen as a nation bound by limitations and began to be seen as a nation without them. It is the moment when dependency gave way to dominance, when aspiration gave way to achievement, when hesitation gave way to boldness. This is transformation, and it is happening before our eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, history has witnessed many deals, but very few that have redefined a nation's destiny. This one has. France may be shocked, but India is energized. The future does not belong to those who cling to the past. It belongs to those bold enough to build it. And today, India is building not only nuclear plants, but a new era of sovereignty, power, and leadership. Thank you.